Since there's been a lot of interest, I thought maybe today we could talk about Claudia in Interview with a Vampire, with the understanding that if you haven't read the books, there may be some spoilers ahead. But first, your Cajun vocabulary for the day, your Cajun French. I have two words for you today, canaille and farouche. Now, these are both adjectives. Canaille is a word that, as a child, I heard a lot. It means to be mischievous or a troublemaker. So, you'd be doing something playfully bad, not too bad, and your parent would say, "Take canaille away. You're misbehaving." Yeah, but it's usually very affectionate. It's not mean, although. Canaille, you can get mischievous in bad ways. And farouche is more like fierce. Somebody who's farouche is fierce. So, fierce, like, fighting in a way, but like in almost an acute way. It's usually used with children or women. So, I thought that those, in talking about Claudia, might be relevant words. Canaille and farouche. So let's get into Claudia. So Claudia, as written in Interview with the Vampire, is a 5-year-old little girl who Louis starts to feed from. Her mother has died of the plague. The flu. It's either the yellow fever or the Spanish influenza, one of those. I can't remember which one was when, but if you go to the Lafayette Cemetery, you'll see many graves from that era. And anyway, Louis is walking through a part of town where it has been, decimated by illness, and he's been living off rats mostly and vermin, and he's kind of refused to eat from people, drink from people. So he hears this little girl crying. He goes in, he finds her mother is dead, and hunger overwhelms him, and he drinks from her. And Lestat has been following him, as Lestat is wont to do, and he's highly amused that Louis has kind of broken his personal code of not feeding from innocents. And he, makes much of it and upsets Louis, and then then Lestat decides to make Claudia a vampire. Now, this little girl is 5 years old in the book, and it's kind of akin to the fact that at the time that Anne Rice was writing the novel, she had just lost her daughter, who was 5 or 6 years old, to leukemia. And so Interview is kind of Rice's way of working through her grief and her crisis of faith that came from all of that. And so, the immortal child is kind of a key feature there. Later in the book, Louis and Claudia travel to Paris together looking for other vampires, and Claudia finds a woman who has lost her daughter, and she asks Louis to turn her into a vampire so that she can have this woman, Madeleine, as a mother figure, because Louis is about to leave Claudia for another vampire, which is a whole other thing. We can discuss Armand too at some point. But anyway, so that's the setup. They have this 5-year-old daughter in the book that they are raising, but obviously as the child grows and becomes more precocious mentally, spiritually, so to speak, her body doesn't change, and that becomes a source of irritation for Claudia, who is very independent and farouche, and she, she struggles with the fact that she's always going to be in this 5-year-old body, and it causes a considerable amount of conflict, because Lestat and Louis tend to treat her as a child, and of course the world sees her as a child, and she's like this, speaks like an adult, and that's the creep factor. As I mentioned in a previous video, the creep factor in Claudia is really that she's this 5-year-old body with this but this like adult mannerisms. And her relationship with Louis is very warm, but she feels the need over time. He takes care of her, but over time she starts to more take care of him, like as an emotional kind of source of comfort. And with Lestat, here's the thing. Lestat is himself childish, right? He didn't have like that upbringing. He didn't grow out of his need for the attention and the affection. And so the two of them are a lot alike in the sense that they're both childish in a lot of ways. And so Lestat and Claudia are alike. And so that means that sometimes they get together. I mean, they work well together. Like they can go out and have fun together because they're kind of like-minded. But at the same time, it also means that they butt heads a lot. They're kind of almost sibling-like as opposed to a parent and a child in that way. So Lestat and Claudia, and Claudia gets fed up with Lestat, and she gets fed up with the way Lestat treats her and Louis, and she realizes that Lestat doesn't really know anything more. Like, Louis' whole thing is that, oh, but, you know, I'm learning from Lestat, and Claudia finally goes, we're not learning anything. And, you know, and so in the film version, the 1994 film, this is pretty much played out as written, aside from the fact that Claudia is obviously older. They leave Lestat and go off to Paris and look for other vampires from which to gain knowledge. In the television series now, again, Claudia is older, and instead of speaking in this precocious way, she actually speaks in a very like childish, slangy way. They've kind of taken it the other direction. I was a little surprised because I think that Louis and Lestat would have valued teaching her the proper way to speak and eat and things like that, but it seems like they just don't have the wherewithal to tame her. They just kind of let her, you know, they're like, oh, she's stomping around, she's doing all this stuff, and they just kind of throw up their hands. So that's kind of interesting. They don't try to restrain her as much or teach her as much, at least not in the little bit that we've seen. So she's just kind of out there doing her thing, which book Claudia does, but book Claudia, besides, you know, dressing really, she learns to use her youthful appearance to her advantage. She'll sit on a park bench and cry, and somebody will come and speak to her, and, you know, oh, are you lost? And then she'll feed on them. Like, she learns how to use it as an entrapment. And I guess television Claudia kind of is there, but kind of isn't. She's clearly frustrated about the fact that she's not going to grow anymore, that she's kind of perpetually on the cusp of puberty, it seems like, which is probably pretty frustrating. Like, the worst. Like, imagine being frozen in middle school for the rest of your life. Yay. Wouldn't you might be a little angry at the people who did that to you. Be like, you couldn't have waited until I was a little older. But yeah, I think Claudia is an interesting character. She's like I've mentioned, it was kind of progressive of them to the book was kind of progressive in the sense that it did show this semi-homosexual relationship, and then they're raising a daughter. And obviously Louis and Lestat have different parenting styles because they're coming from different places. I don't think Lestat's prepared to be a parent of any kind. I think at some point he tells Louis that he just needs like company more, you know, congenial than his, and so here's someone who might be more his speed, so to speak. I don't know why he thinks a 5-year-old is gonna be like something that Louis wants. Like, here, have a child. Maybe you and this kid can be friends. But I mean, I think that's about all I was gonna say about it. I guess once Claudia and Louis kind of pair off and go away, there's a pseudo, again, like, it skims the kind of love relationship, romantic relationship, without tipping quite over. It's a very fine line, and again, I think that's another reason to age up the character. If you want to, like, talk about Armand and the fact that Antonio Banderas plays him in the film, obviously Armand, as written, physically is about 15 years old, but you get a little weird when you got a 30-year-old actor and like a teenager in this pseudo romantic relationship, so you age him up. It's complicated. I think obviously more modern takes are more willing to be open with the homosexual sides of things. Again, I think, as written, the vampires at some point no longer care about gender or sexuality, because it kind of doesn't matter anymore. They kind of superseded that. But there's still element of like attraction between characters, so there's still, I guess, some preference sometimes. It's a gray area. I think you can read it a lot of different ways, but also age for vampires is very, like, you've got a physical age that you look, you've got your vampire age, like how long you've been a vampire. So you could look 24, be a 2-year vampire, but then and then there's like your actual age from start to finish, like a 200. I'm 200, but my vampire age is 150 because I was turned when I was 50. Like, there's just a lot of math to do, and yet but when you're portraying it visually, it's a little bit tricky to make it palatable for viewers, which is why you age certain characters up, or, besides the fact, as I mentioned, that working with children on a set is really, really challenging. There's a lot of rules about how many hours they can be on the set and be working. I worked on a film where we had children. They were luckily not the central focus of the film, so we were able to work around it pretty well, but it does add time to a shoot. It adds money to a shoot because you need more time to shoot scenes with the kids since they can't work for as long, and you need tutors and things like that, and to make sure that the kids' needs are being met. There's additional oversight. There's all this stuff, and again, on a pseudo horror film or television series, there's going to be more concern about the well-being of the children on set. So it gets time consuming, costly. You age your characters up so that if you ever wondered why, like, all the teenagers in television shows are played by 20-somethings, this is why. Because your 20-somethings are not going to want to take the night off for their senior prom. Like, you just, it's just not, it's logistical, largely. 20-somethings are adults, and they no longer need all of the extra protections that minors do. But anyway, that is Claudia in a nutshell, I think. Here's the big spoiler. The thing they didn't do in the movie that I'm wondering if they'll do in the show. If you've read the book, you know, and if you haven't, you don't. So if you don't want to know, if you want to be surprised, stop now. But Lestat follows them to Paris. Not completely unexpected, given his nature. And he puts Armand up to killing Claudia. Now, in the movie, Armand and his Théâtre des Vampires do that themselves because they recognize that Claudia has, again, spoilers, has murdered Lestat, and that's a crime in the vampire world. You don't kill your own kind. So, and also another crime is to make one as young as Claudia, 5 years old. Now, I don't know if that'll apply to a 12 or 14-year-old vampire, but the idea is that you don't make one so young that they can't care for themselves. They need some kind of companion, adult-looking person with them. A 14-year-old could probably kind of fake it. I don't know, but, obviously a 5-year-old cannot. So there's this scene in the book that's always lived with me, and it's Lestat sitting there holding Claudia's yellow dress and begging for Louis's forgiveness as Louis realizes it was Lestat that set up that betrayed them, basically, and set up for Claudia to be killed by Armand and his théâtre. And like, it didn't happen in the movie. In the movie, they just kind of had Armand and Santiago and the others do it of their own accord. So I am curious to see if and again, we can get into the Armand stuff, and they also did not have Louis stay with Armand in the movie, whereas in the book he actually stays with Armand for a number of years. Because he doesn't blame Armand in the book, he blames Lestat, and in the movie, obviously, he blames Armand for everything that went wrong there. So, so I'm curious to see if we're going to lay the blame on Lestat or Armand or some kind of combination of the two in the television series, if and when we get to that point. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll decide not to kill Claudia. They could make any number of changes, I suppose. But, yeah, and Claudia's ghost does show up again in Merrick. If that's one of the reasons I read that book sometimes, is because I love Louis, and you don't see a lot of Louis, but in Merrick he is there and he's able to communicate with Claudia's ghost, and it's kind of a nice little bit of closure. But yeah, so we'll see if the yellow dress happens or not. Maybe it won't be yellow, but that scene, like, in the book is just, I don't know, for me, very, very, like, concrete in my mind. It's very, like, strong and sticks with me. It's stuck with me ever since the first time I read the book. So the fact that it wasn't in the movie, I remember being disappointed. I mean, the movie makes sense, and I do love the movie. Like, I was like, okay, logically, I see what happened here. They decided to leave the fact that Lestat is alive as the big reveal at the end of the film instead. But just, it's kind of dumb, because you're like, she's in trouble for killing Lestat, but Lestat's like right here going, kill her, she tried to kill me. I don't know. Maybe somebody went, that the logic doesn't play, let's just not have Lestat there. But I still love that scene, and I still think it's worth defying a little bit of logic for the impact of that moment. But that's just me as a writer. I love moments like that. I'm definitely an angst type person. You know, I love things that pack a punch like that. So that's it. I'll stop rambling now. And maybe we'll do a video about Armand later. It's just that I'm traveling for a few days, so I won't be able to film for a few days. So it may be a few days before I can come back and talk any more about any of this. Yeah, I'll probably wait until I've seen the next episode, and then maybe we can talk about that too. Okay, take care. Thanks for dropping by.